Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's InfoBurst webinar. Today, we will be looking at the upcoming InfoBurst version 2022.2. This will be the second release of InfoBurst this year. For those that don't know me, my name is Bryan Baca. I am the product support manager here at InfoSol. I deal almost exclusively with InfoBurst, support, development, pre-sales. Good chance that if you work with InfoBurst, you've worked with myself or my colleague, Jeremy. One moment. And before we get started, for those that join late or maybe have coworkers, fellow InfoBurst users that might benefit from the webinar, the session is being recorded and it will be made available roughly this time tomorrow on YouTube, and we'll make sure everyone has that link. Okay. Alrighty. So let's get right into it. InfoBurst 2022.2. Now we're doing things a bit differently this time. Typically, we will have the version overview webinar after the release of a particular version. We're trying out the reverse this time. So we're going to have the webinar first, and then a week from today is the general release of InfoBurst 2022.2. This will give us the opportunity to conduct the webinar, record it, and then make that available as part of the release notes, so that in addition to the documentation, users can benefit from this overview video. So we hope that will help you out. As always, the release notes are available up at the InfoSol help desk, help.infosol.com, and you'll find the release notes form under forums. Okay, so let's get right into features, and today we're going to start with features around Tableau. So a few minor changes for Tableau in 2022.2. Up to this version, there was no option to control the PDF that was produced from a Tableau workbook. Tableau would always produce a landscape orientation, but some reports, some workbooks are designed for portrait. So now you have the option to choose. The default is still landscape, but you can select portrait and have those reports published in the proper orientation. And you can see the option there on the right. That's within the delivery and format tab, where the format as PDF is where you'll see that portrait landscape option. And also support added for delivery conditions for a Tableau workbook. This is specific to a Tableau workbook published in Excel format. This won't apply to any other format but Excel. But you can now leverage Excel conditions, deciding when to conduct a delivery based on conditions in the data using a Tableau workbook. Okay, on to changes and enhancements around workflows. First, there are a couple of WebI-centric or WebI publishing workflows, taking a WebI report in a workflow, publishing it and delivering it to, I think, email and network folder are supported. Those are now available as options for workflow users. So if you have workflow users and you want them to be able to publish WebI, you can now opt them in for those workflows. Those were not previously available. Within the workflow, up till now, you not had the ability to view the last available activity log. Now on the summary section of the workflow, you'll see a button that says view last log, and that'll pop up the log right there in the workflow. And then from there, you can review the log, and you can even email it to yourself as an Excel file. Within the schedule section of a workflow, the frequency on specific dates was previously an interface where you went in and selected a date and added it, selected a date and added it. It was a bit cumbersome. Now we've incorporated an inline calendar. So when you're working with this frequency, you can just look at the calendar, click, click, click on all the dates you want. Much easier to pick those calendar dates. And then finally, we've added a brand new workflow. This one's called Cache Database Query. For those of you that use XDC, and these days XDC users are working almost exclusively with Squirrel as the data visualization tool. You know the process of creating an XDC and creating cache queries and preparing that data for use in a dashboard. We've identified really valid use case for simplifying the cache and cache query creation process through a workflow. So let's take a look at that. Let's jump over to InfoBurst. So under the new dropdown, we'll select workflow, and then we'll filter this list of workflows for just those that concern database queries. And this is the new workflow. So again, if you're familiar with the cache creation or the XDC creation process, these steps will seem familiar to you. In this case, we're working with a database query, so we need to first select the connection. I'm going to use this first one, sales records. Then I can either select an existing query, or I can create a new query. I'm going to use this existing sales records 100 query. So there I can see the query on the right. I can preview it here to make sure I got the right query, the right data. Then I'll select continue. Now here we're looking at the cache query section of the workflow. And if you work with XDCs, you know you can't create a cache query if you haven't refreshed the cache at least once, right? We need to build the data cache. So this message here simply tells us you have to refresh this cache. You can click here to do it before we can go creating cache queries. So I'll just click that, and that'll kick off the XDC, the cache creation process. So there we can see it refreshing the query and building. And once that's done, we can go about creating a cache query. So I'll just create a simple all records query. And on the right, it's just a select star. I'll save that. That's a cache query that we can now go consume in Squirrel. I can actually run that here to preview the data, the results of the cache query. So once we've defined the query to run, defined any cache queries we want to leverage in the dashboard, then we can move on to scheduling the cache. And let's say this is a frequent cache. Let's say every weekday. Let's say these hours are good. Maybe every 2 hours between these hours on these dates. That's when we want to run this cache of, basically refreshing every 2 hours. So that's our schedule, and that's it. So that cache is now being created. It's going to run on that bi-hourly schedule and making that data available to our Squirrel dashboard. Now, we're not going to spend any time in this webinar talking about the integration between InfoBurst and Squirrel, which is a dashboarding, data visualization, web application design tool. But there is a really useful webinar. Let's just put that up on the screen here. That was conducted a few weeks ago by Donald McCormick over at Squirrel 365. And he does a deep dive into the integration between Squirrel as a data visualization tool and InfoBurst as the data management piece, what we just saw, caching data, scheduling data for use in a dashboard. So there is the URL. That is a bit long, so give me just a moment, and I'm going to put that into the Zoom chat for everyone or anyone that's interested. And that link will take you right to that video. Okay, so that's in that same area of the product, we have a minor change to XDC. XDC designers often want the ability to return to the dashboard the last refresh date of the data. This is a useful piece of information to have to know how current the data is. So any new XDC you create in 2022.2 and forward will have a default cache query called last refresh. You don't have to create it, it'll just be there. And then you can call that cache query from the dashboard to return the last refresh date and time of that cache, and then display it in your dashboard. Actually, before I go any further, I'll just remind everyone, as you're viewing the webinar, if you have questions, we're gonna field all those at the end. So feel free to put those into the questions and question and answer section of Zoom. Okay, so changes in the system area. So with a schedule, an administrator can assign that schedule to run as a particular user, run as. And that run as attribute has now been added to the schedule feed in OData. For those of you that use OData and you look at schedule information, you can now return that run as column as well. When creating a new business objects platform, you now have the ability under the options tab to define the default auth type or default authentication type. So let's go look at that. Let's jump into system. I'll just create a new platform. This only applies to business objects platforms. So when defining the platform, if your authentication type is not enterprise, which is the default, let's just say it's Active Directory. When you create that platform, any user that then adds credentials for that platform, this will be their default authentication type. So they're not having to choose, they don't have to change between enterprise and some other auth type. You can pre-select it for them. Okay. Okay, on to schedules. So just like the on specific dates frequency in the workflow that we talked about earlier, the same frequency in the standard schedule user interface will also use that inline calendar. And we're actually going to look at that in another section of the schedule UI in just a moment, so you can see what it looks like. The major addition for scheduling in 2022.2 is the use or the new calendar object. So if you are a business objects user, you're probably familiar with custom calendars, right? So an administrator will go and define a calendar based on your organization's business dates, business holidays, that sort of thing. And then when you create a schedule, instead of having to select those dates manually, you can just select that predefined calendar. We've added the same functionality in InfoBurst. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so here from the new menu, you're going to see a brand new item, calendar. We'll give it a name. We'll call this My Business Calendar. Then we just select our standard, let's call them our business holidays, something like that, or whatever your calendar represents, right? So we can select as many dates as we want, as far out as we want. We save our calendar, and you can have as many of these as you want as well. Then when we create a schedule, when selecting the frequency in the when drop down here, you'll see a new option that says on calendar dates. Then we can go out and select a calendar. There may be many. There's the one we just created, My Business Calendar. And now, hopefully, schedule creation has gotten easier for the users. As that calendar is changed, maybe your business dates change, maybe you extend the calendar out, those changes are automatically reflected in any schedule that uses the calendar. So in InfoBurst, you can think of it like a delivery template. It's a calendar template. You define what dates you want, and then users can come along and use those calendars. Okay. All right, let's move on then to SharePoint. So here, this particular feature has been requested quite a bit lately, and that is the ability for InfoBurst to consume SharePoint lists. Now, before we look at this, let's pop over into SharePoint. I just want to show you what this looks like. So here in SharePoint, I've got a few lists. I've got a states list. You can see here it's just 6-7 columns of information. And let's say I want to use this in InfoBurst, right? So let's come back over here and talk about how we can use a SharePoint list. First, we can use a SharePoint list as a data source. That means we go back to our list here. I might want to say use this column here, these states to drive a state parameter. I might want to use these email addresses to drive a delivery, or maybe one of these columns as an extra column. We can now do that with a SharePoint list. And I'll show you that in a moment. Also, we can add a SharePoint list to an item in as an item in a burst, publish it and deliver it, just like we would a query or a WebI report. So we can publish as Excel, HTML, Hyper, and data sets for Power BI. So let's go look at that. Okay, let's start with a SharePoint list as a data source. So I'm going to say new, and for data source, we have to build what's called a file list. So I'll create a new file list. We'll call this SharePoint list. The file list source is coming from a platform that is SharePoint. I have a SharePoint platform here. And here you can see my states list SharePoint list. So I'll select it there. I'll save it, and then we can actually preview it here just to make sure we're talking to SharePoint correctly. And it's just going to return the first column of data. This is just a test. So that looks good. Now we can use that in a burst. So here I've got a WebI report, and from that I'm going to create a burst. It has a parameter for state, and I would like to supply the state values from the SharePoint list. So I'll select data source, and my data source is the file list that references the SharePoint list. I'll select that and say OK. And now we are bursting using SharePoint as a data source. And we can go on to create a delivery where the email addresses are coming from that list. Maybe we use an extra column to name a file. Works just like any other data source would. Okay. And then the second half of this new functionality is the ability to publish and deliver the contents of a SharePoint list. So let's go back here. And to do this, we're just adding the SharePoint list as we would any other document or item. So from the new menu, I'll select Document. And we'll select our SharePoint platform. While I'm here, I don't have this in my slides, but this platform browser is going to look different for everyone in 2022.2. So instead of a drop-down menu, you're going to see a list of platforms. Those platforms can be filtered by type. So we're trying to make this just a little bit easier to use as well. And this is actually less clicks than the way we previously presented the platform browser to you. So here I just select the platform, and then I say browse that platform, browse SharePoint. So here I want to pull in, let's say, I have another SharePoint list here, sales records. This is a more substantial amount of data. And I'd like to actually publish that and send it to someone. So let's go back over here. I will select my sales records list, add it to InfoBurst. And let's go put that in this existing burst. Which one was it? I think it was this one. Nope. We'll just create a new burst. Let's go like this, burst for sales records. So there it is. You can put it in a burst. You can add a delivery. Here, I'm going to say, let's send it to email. And I'll just send this out to a list that I have. So I have a list here. Let's reach an email list, and I'll just use the email column there. I think it has 2 or 3 recipients. Say OK. So just like anything else, we burst and deliver from InfoBurst. These are all the different destinations to which we can send the output from a SharePoint list. Then over on the Format tab, we can see the formats that are available: Excel, CSV, HTML, Tableau Hyper, and Power BI dataset. Now, I ran this demo just a little while ago, and I didn't particularly like the way the raw Excel looks. So I'm going to go add a few extensions. And extensions are just ways to modify Excel from a source. So one of the things I didn't like about the Excel file is that the columns don't auto-fit and the data is cut off. So I'm going to add an auto-fit extension to this Excel file. Then I'm also going to add a column level filter, auto filter. So the first row, the column headers, you can actually filter on those. So I'll add that as well. Save it. Let's run that and look at the output. So surprising number of our users have been requesting this feature. And it, to us, it was new, this use of lists, which looked to be just uploaded Excel files, but we're glad to provide this as functionality going forward. We see real value in this as a data source. Okay, so that was actually published and sent out. And if I come over here to my mail client, we can see what that looks like. So here we have an attached Excel file that was produced from a SharePoint list. There it is. And as we'll look at just a bit later, there are other ways that we can publish SharePoint lists as well, which might be interesting to you. Okay. Let's close that. Okay, so that's SharePoint list support. Let's move on then to notes. Notes are not something that gets a lot of fanfare in InfoBurst. We've seen some interesting use of notes. Notes it's just an object you can create in a folder, and maybe, when you want to provide guidance to users, you can put some information in a note, maybe for documentation purposes. But we've expanded the note. Now, as you may or may not know, in InfoBurst, you can publish and deliver the results of a database query, or now in 2022.2, the contents of a SharePoint list, in a variety of formats and deliver them to different destinations. One of those formats is HTML, and we have a fair number of users that do this now. They send the HTML format as it's inline content in an email message to other destinations. I think we've even got one user who will actually use InfoBurst to publish query HTML to a folder that represents a web server. And so they're literally publishing web content from a query through InfoBurst. And when you're publishing in HTML format, it produces a data table that has formatting, right? And you can control this formatting through a single CSS file up until now. The limitation there was if you wanted to customize the look and feel of that data table, you could only have one style that applied to everything. So we got several requests for the ability to customize the CSS per delivery, and now you can do that through a note. So you create a note, and within it, you put the CSS you want to use, and then you save that note, and then you can reference it as the template for the HTML delivery. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so here, and if you've never done it, new note, there it is right there, right? Not really complicated feature. Now within the note, we've added, so basically a note is a title and some text. That's what a note is, right? We've added this option, CSS for HTML tables. So you select it, paste in your CSS, and actually you can find this on the help desk, the default CSS for a table. So then you can copy that and do whatever you want to it. So I've actually created two of them. I've created one CSS note, which has a blue theme for the table. And then this one is the same CSS, which has a different theme, an orange theme for the table. So I'm going to utilize that as a template in a delivery. So in this burst, I have added a database query, and I would now like to publish that as HTML, where the HTML is stylized using that CSS note. So I will add a new delivery here. And my destination is going to be the InfoBurst portal, but we could send this anywhere we want. We'll put this in the demo reports folder. And then here on the format tab, we will select HTML. And then first we'll select and use the CSS blue note. So we'll select that, save it, and I'll just run that because it runs super quick and we can look at the output. So let's jump into the portal. And here is my content group for that HTML. And so there you can see the formatted result. So a data table, and then I've used some, a darker blue in the header, a lighter blue is the alternating row. I like showing this off because, you can in InfoBurst take raw data from a database, raw data from a SharePoint list, and publish it, stylize it, format it in HTML, and send that off to various destinations. So now that we published that in kind of this default blue, let's go back and I'll do the same thing. We'll just edit the delivery. I'm going to change the template to the orange template. We'll save it and run it. Close that. Now remember, for those of you that use the portal, we version in the portal automatically. So if I come back into that same content group, this one, there's the second version. There's the using the CSS that has the orange highlights, right? And here's the previous version that used the blue. So hopefully this will provide a little bit more flexibility for styling for those of you that do database query or now SharePoint list to HTML. Okay, let's talk about enhancements to the burst. And this is a very interesting feature. Let's first talk about the burst and what you can do with it, right? So within a burst, you can optionally define how the burst will behave when any step in the burst aborts. This is called burst abort behavior. It's a setting of the burst. And by default, when any step in the burst aborts, the burst will automatically stop dead. It won't go on and do anything else. But there are options in the abort behavior menu that say, okay, stop processing the current item that has aborted, but go process everything else. Or stop the current item, deliver what's available, and then go process everything else. So there's different options. A new option, a new abort behavior option has been added called continue with retry. And this is something that has been requested quite a bit over the years. So in essence, with this setting, you can automatically retry an aborted burst. But more importantly, this is not just a dumb retry, which means it failed, now go rerun. This means that InfoBurst is going to retry, but only for the failed steps. So imagine a scenario where we are bursting a report for 100 states, 50 states. And we get halfway through that 50 state list, refresh, export, and something, let's say it's a WebI report, and something in BusinessObjects fails. These things happen, right? So now we've gotten halfway through the list, refreshes and exports of the file, and then there was a failure. So you can turn on the retry option that says, okay, I want to retry up to 10 times in the event of such a failure. Then when InfoBurst retries that document, it's not going to run for the whole list, right? We've already refreshed and exported successfully for 25 states. InfoBurst will then pick up and refresh. Let's say it's failed on state 26. It'll go down and just run state 26 again, right? I'll show you an example of this. So understand that this is not just a bulk retry, it's a smart retry. Now, before I show you how this works, there's a supplement to this, right? So in addition to, okay, let's frame it this way. I know that I have a problematic BO environment, so I'm going to invoke the retry. Now, the retry may work, right? So if the issue in BusinessObjects, but this could apply equally to Tableau or, as you'll see in a moment, Power BI. If the if the failure is intermittent and the retry overcomes it, so let's say there's a temporary resource issue with BusinessObjects, right, where you think or you know that if InfoBurst just retries a few times, eventually that issue resolves itself in business objects and the failure will go away, then the retry is successful. But imagine a scenario where you're retrying, but that issue never resolves itself. So you retry 5 times, it just keeps failing over and over and over again. In that scenario, you can invoke what's called recovery mode. What recovery mode means is that, again, InfoBurst is going to run the burst. It fails at so that last retry fails at a certain point. InfoBurst is going to record the state of the burst. And the state refers to, and it says it right there, all steps that completed and content successfully generated. So it remembers what actually worked, and it saves that content that was already created, and it stores it. And that burst is now in a recovery mode. So in this mode, you say, okay, I need to now go out and get this problem solved with my business objects admins. And once you know the problem is solved and that burst is going to run successfully, you can go back into that burst at a later time, run it in this recovery mode, and it will only run for the failed steps, but then deliver everything that burst generates, right? So, and hopefully this will make a bit more sense in context. So let's go back to InfoBurst. And I have a burst here, a situation kind of engineered to show this off. So I've got a little utility that will simulate a failure, in this case, a failure on export. So I'm going to run this burst that is designed to fail, so we can remind ourselves what that looks like. So let's run this failed burst. And this little utility is going to simulate a failure on export. Export is where InfoBurst calls into business objects and says, publish as, let's say, PDF. That's what export means. So here I've simulated a failure that says, okay, we made that request to business objects, but business objects return some sort of timeout error. These things happen, right? So this burst is aborted. Okay, fair enough. I now want to invoke retry in the hopes that it will overcome this issue, right? The issue will resolve itself. It's intermittent. So if I come over here, select the abort behavior drop down here under processing options, there's the new option, continue with retry. I'm just going to leave this as 1 retry, but as it says, you can retry up to 10 times. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to run that again. And my little script behind the scenes is it's going to fail once, but then magically resolve the issue on the second retry. So now what's happening here is key, right? So this is a multi-pass scenario. I'll go back up once it's done and we'll review the whole log. Okay, let's go back up and just review what's happened here. So this is a multi-pass scenario. So we have, I think, like 10 states. So you see it over and over again, right? We're going to refresh, export, refresh, export over and over and over again, right? For that list of states. Then when we got down here to Florida, right? We refreshed successfully, but then the export failed. So up to this point, right? These states, the refreshes and exports were successful, and InfoBurst tried and succeeded to run the rest of the states in the list, right? So this was truly some sort of intermittent issue. So what we've got is output for everything but Florida. So the burst completes, its status is aborted. Now we come down here and InfoBurst kicks in the retry, 1 of 1. Now notice, we're not rerunning for everything. We're only rerunning for Florida. So refresh for Florida, export Florida, then InfoBurst goes on to deliver everything. So it's a smart retry. I will note at this point, because it's important, this retry logic only applies to what we call the generate phase of the burst. So everything up to the disconnection from the reporting platform, so basically the refreshing, the filtering, the exporting, it applies there. This does not apply to what we call the deliver phase, which is where content is being delivered. Just be aware of that. But I'd say 99% of failures occur in the generate phase. So let's now close that. Okay, So we've talked about retry, and we've seen an example of the retry doing its job, which meaning rerun for the failed steps and where they succeed and we deliver everything. But remember the second scenario I described, which is despite the retries, the failure is persistent, right? So I'm going to go change my little script here. So we're going to simulate that scenario. So in this scenario, we're going to run it again, but the retries will fail. And actually, before we do that, so we're going to enable that recovery mode that will basically save the state of the burst as it, the last time it failed, where we can then later rerun it. So I'm going to save that. Let's run it. So last time we had the export step failed. We retried. The problem had resolved itself. The export worked and the burst completed successfully. In this simulation, the first export will fail. We'll get down to the bottom here. InfoBurst will retry. There it is, retry 1 of 1. The export still failed, right? So with the recovery mode enabled, InfoBurst remembers this state, all the successful steps, stores all the produced content so that when we rerun it, and I'll show you, so now we come back into the burst, we know visually that this burst is in recovery mode because the run button turns blue. That's our indication that this burst is in recovery mode. So now when we run that burst manually, let's say the scenario is fail, 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 we see the issue, we go get it resolved in business objects. Now we know we can rerun the burst safely, it's going to work. I want to rerun it in recovery mode, which means don't rerun for everything, only rerun for the failed step or steps during the very last failed execution. Oh, I forgot to change my script. Let's go do that right now. And that's okay because it's still in recovery mode. Let's do that. Let's make sure that finished. It did. Let's go like that, like that. I think it's still running. Oh, here we go. Okay, so I've changed my script so there are no more failures. So we've gone out, we've magically resolved our business objects issue, and now we're in recovery mode. Let's run it in recovery mode. And the important bit here is it's just like another retry. InfoBurst remembers what worked. It stored the produced files. You can see right there, we're rerunning the burst, but only for Florida because that's the step that failed the last time. Then, as you'll see in a moment, InfoBurst will then go on to deliver Florida and all the rest of the content from the last execution. And I think my BO server's having a bit of an issue, ironically. So let's close that out. But this feature is described in detail in the help desk. If it's something that you're interested in exploring, I would refer you there. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us in the help desk, and we're happy to provide you guidance. This is the kind of feature that we hope you'll never need. We hope you have a reliable reporting environment, but we know we have users who have environments that have chronic issues, and this may help you to better recover from those issues with automatic retries and the recovery mode. Okay, let's then move on to kind of the highlight of 2022.2, and that is Power BI publishing. We've had a lot of requests for this over the last, I'd say, 1.5 to 2 years, and we're happy to finally introduce it in this latest version. So in 2022.2, you will have the ability, just like you would with a WebI report, Crystal report, Tableau Workbook, even a query, to schedule, burst, publish, and deliver Power BI reports and paginated reports. And just a bit, I'll explain the difference for those that don't know. So if you intend to use InfoBurst with Power BI, a few things you need to know. First, and this is a Microsoft side restriction or requirement, Power BI report publishing is only available at their premium capacity license level. a lesser license type, you won't have the option to publish. InfoBurst won't be able to connect and do that. So just note that. Then the other one is InfoBurst. This is an add-on. So you would need this add-on in place, this add-on license, to be able to work with Power BI. So let me show you what that looks like in InfoBurst. Okay, so this starts with a new document. So we'll add a new document. This time we're looking at our Power BI platform. So InfoBurst goes out and connects to Power BI. I'll go into my InfoBurst folder, and there we can see our Power BI reports. Those are the ones with the little P with the gold background there. And the ones with the black background are a Power BI paginated report. So a Power BI report is kind of the modern report. If you're at all familiar with Power BI, it's the modern dashboard style report that you can create in Power BI. Paginated reports are more rudimentary. They're basic tabular reports that you create with a separate client. And for those of you that remember SSRS, this is basically SSRS upgraded to work in the Power BI portal. So they're not the same thing. Paginated reports are more basic, but we also support those as well if you have paginated reports. We're not going to work with those. We're going to work with the regular Power BI report. And actually, before we do this, I'm going to go show you what we're working with. So let's go over here and just go to look at that report. So let's see, that's this one here, sales by region. Okay, so there's our Power BI report. This happens to be a report that has multiple pages. If you're a WebI user, a page is like a report tab. If you're a Tableau user, a page is like a view, right? So I've got page 1, page 2. Each one of them has different content, right? And I would like to take that in InfoBurst, burst it, publish it, and deliver it. So I'm going to add that sales by region to InfoBurst. It's that one there. Let's add it to a burst. Again, just like every other burst item, we can add it to the burst and do things with it. In this case, I want to first burst it by filtering. Power BI reports, the only bursting method is filtering. They don't have parameters. So I'm going to add a filter. Now, for the discerning eye, this is going to look a little bit different to you. With WebI, with Tableau, you can select from a list of report elements or variables and select the one you want to filter on. Unfortunately, at this point, the Power BI SDK does not give us this option. Therefore, we can't make it available to you. So not a big deal. All you need to know is the name of the column or the element on which you want to filter in your report, right? This little question mark here, there's a section of the help desk that kind of talks you through this, the various scenarios, but the most basic one is you just name the filter variable. So I'm going to filter on region, so I just type in the word region. Then we can go on to supply a list of region values. I'm going to use, I've created a multi-column list, but we can use source values from any InfoBurst source, database query, Excel, whatever you're working with. We'll add that. So there's that. And for this, let's go and we'll deliver this up to the portal again. So I'll select the portal as my destination, put this in my demo reports folder. All the same bells and whistles. I can customize the file names. I can send email notifications. When it comes to format, I'm selecting the PDF format. And just like the tab selection in a WebI report, you can pick and choose which pages to publish. So we have 3 pages, and let's say I just want to publish page 1 to the portal. So there's my delivery. And I'll run that. And I've actually run this ahead of time as well, just to show you the results. So let's close this. And if we go into the portal, into the demo reports. There's my sales by region content group. And within that, I've actually run this several times, so I have several different versions. Here is our bursted by filtering Power BI report. We burst by region, publish that in PDF format. So there are different outputs. So Power BI is new, but all the bursting, publishing, destination, scheduling, all the same, just for Power BI reports. And that's that. Okay, so I think that's it. Just a reminder, I know there are still plenty of you that are back on build 240, which is now about a year and a half old, the last version of 240, which was the last 32-bit version. We're strongly encouraging our 240 users to move forward into the 64-bit InfoBurst world, where the latest 64-bit version is the upcoming 2022.2. We do have documentation that walks you through this process. It's very straightforward. It says migration, but it's not at all complicated. So if you go to the help desk, help.infosol.com, go to the search bar and just type in 64-bit or 64-bit migration, you'll find the document that guides you through this process. And if you have any questions, don't struggle. Log a ticket in the help desk. We're happy to provide you some guidance. The webinar recording, as I said earlier, will be available sometime tomorrow, and we'll send out a follow-up email to you when that recording is available if you need to make that available to other users. And our next InfoBurst event. So we don't yet have a date for the next InfoBurst webinar. We'll be making that available as soon as we know it. If you're signed up on events.infosol.com, you'll get an email. But the next big event coming up is the InfoBurst Experience. Those of you that would attend IBIS, InfoBurst Experience was one of the many tracks that were available at our annual IBIS conference. This year, InfoBurst will be presented as its own virtual conference. And the date, I think it's yet to be set. I think it's going to be mid-July sometime. As always in the InfoBurst Experience, it's everything InfoBurst. We have all sorts of folks, InfoBurst experts, users, presenting case studies, taking deep dives into various features and solutions. We have our annual InfoBurst User Influence Council, where users come in and tell us what they're looking for in the product in terms of future development. So you can find that, and somebody has, oh, thank you, John. He put that in the chat. Attendibis.com /InfoBurst Experience. We have different URLs. I think they'll both get you to the same place. Okay, so that's it. Oh, sorry, one more slide. Really important to us, stay informed. Know when new versions of InfoBurst come out by going to the announcements forum at help.infosol.com. Click the follow button. You will automatically get an email when we release new versions of the product. And we've got several social media channels, Facebook, Twitter. Just do a search for InfoBurst, you'll find us. But one of them is LinkedIn. So I thought I'd advertise that today. It's just a standard group of InfoBurst users sharing information. We publish a lot of information about InfoBurst, their upcoming events. So if you use LinkedIn, please join our InfoBurst user group. And with that, let's switch over and take a look at some of the questions. Tell you what, I see questions in the chat, so I'm going to review that first. Anne asks, can you upload a calendar, and if so, format required? No, Anne, not currently, but we're always interested in your ideas. So if if you could go to our forum on help.infosol.com forums, look for user influence. I encourage you to create an entry that describes the requirement and be very specific, right? We want to create it from Excel or whatever, and that is our trigger to go and start looking at that as a possible development feature or development task for a future version. So that's for everyone, right? The user influence forum is where to go to share those ideas. We'll come in and we'll ask you questions. Other users might come in and add their comments. So user influence forum on the InfoSol help desk. Let's see. I missed the beginning. When will this version be available? Nick asks. Nick, the general release of 2022.2 is next Thursday, which is the 28th. And if you're signed up for the announcements form, you'll get an automatic notification of that. And somebody asked Anne's question there, answered Anne's question. Let's see. Looks like there's some technical stuff happening between Jeremy and Prasad. Let's see. I see that question from you, Nick. I'll look for that in the questions thing there. Just answer. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Okay. A few questions from Nick. Can we create a DB query and output to a SharePoint list? No. Never heard of such a thing. So again, if that's something that you're looking for, I'm not sure. I won't even comment on whether that's possible. But put it in the influence form. Be again technically, detailed as possible. We want to put in a small bit of information, or we're trying to, populate a SharePoint list with tens of thousands of rows. Be as specific as possible, and that'll help us in the evaluation. Okay, so over to the Q&A. Matt asks, is SharePoint list function and additional licensing or included with standard InfoBurst? It's standard InfoBurst, Matt. There's no add-on required to work with SharePoint lists as either a data source or a burst item where you publish it and deliver it. And then let's see, Nick asks, for the run burst with retry feature, will the retry pick up on a failed delivery? No. This only applies to the generate phase of the burst. So basically everything but deliveries. There are architecture issues that prevent us from doing this sort of thing during delivery. It's certainly been talked about, it's been considered, and we do certainly appreciate that, when it comes to connecting to email servers, SharePoint servers, and so forth, those environments can fail too. It's not off our list, it's just not something that's currently supported. So I hope that answers that question. Okay, so that's all the questions. Thank you for sticking around for the entire hour. We're always happy to have you. Again, InfoBurst Experience, mid-July. We hope you can join us. Go to events.infosol.com for that information. And with that, we'll close out today's InfoBurst webinar. Thank you again, and have a great day.